Arnie calling from A24. How's it going?
Yeah, really well. How you doing?
Hey, pretty good. Sorry about this late call. The last interview ran over, but are you good to have your 15-minute interview with David Lowery right now?
I would love it.
Cool. Hold on one second. I'm going to give him a ring, and then I'll connect you guys, okay?
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, welcome everyone to the TikTok Take with Doug Pagitt. Special little edition here. It's a bit of a short in the podcast collection. I had a conversation with David Lowery. He is the writer and director and the person behind the new film. It's taking over critics and smart movie watchers around the country called A Ghost Story. And I was privileged to talk to him. I saw the film. I was really mesmerized by it, surprised by it, thought it was super interesting, and had a chance to interview the director. We had this funny little kind of relationship and time pressure where the person setting up the interview with him was kind of hounding us. And so anyway, I think you might enjoy it. It's going to be shorter than some of the normal podcasts that you get here in this stream. But I know I've been away for a little while. Had hip surgery, whole other conversation. We'll talk about that in a future podcasts. But here it is, my conversation with David Lowery about this film called A Ghost Story, which is kind of about spirituality and kind of about life and kind of about time. I don't know why I got so interested in the storyline of that costume or the outfit that Casey Affleck, who's one of the actors, wore playing the role of the ghost. But anyway, we spent a lot of time talking about that and a number of other things. So, hey, thanks for listening to the podcast and hope you enjoy this conversation.
Okay, Doug, I have you on the phone with David Lowery for your 15-minute phone interview.
Great, thank you. Hello, David.
Hi, Doug.
Hi there. Hey, congratulations on the film.
Thanks.
It's got to be exciting times the day before the big national release.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like we did our New York, LA release, and it went a little wider last week, and then now like this week, and just knowing that it'll be in theaters everywhere is very surreal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Hey, I saw the film the other night, and I really liked it. And I walked out and ran into somebody I knew at the theater, and they said, "Hey, what's that movie about?" And I just paused and said, you just have to see it. I didn't know how to. It almost felt like I didn't want to tell people too much about the film because it felt to me like it would sort of, spoil it to tell them, just kind of give a preconditioned idea about what the film is about. How do you answer that question when you were making the film or even now when somebody just, gives you that sort of very simple question like, hey, what is a ghost story about?
I usually go for the most simple description possible, which is it's the story of a ghost haunting in one house for several hundred years. Yeah. And then I leave it at that because I agree with you. It's very difficult to describe the film without spoiling the experience and also being reductive of the experience. It's a movie that does not translate well to a synopsis.
Yeah. Did you know that the whole time when you were making it? Was that sort of clear to you that it was going to be that kind of film, or did that sort of come out as during the making of it?
I knew to a certain extent, but I'm never really thinking about the synopsis when I'm writing a movie or shooting it. It wasn't until I had to start describing it to people when we were getting ready to show it that I realized, hey, this movie might be a little harder to market than I initially thought.
Yeah.
But it wasn't on my mind at the beginning. I certainly knew it was a movie that would be challenging in certain ways, but I was never in a position where I had to try to sell it to somebody or pitch it to someone. So I hadn't really crossed that bridge yet.
Even with the actors in it, did you? How did you describe to them what emotions they should carry or how they should be in the film? Did you have to give a lot of background on that, or how does that process go?
Not too much. I mean, it helps that Casey and Rooney and I are all friends, and we just trust one another. The script was fairly detailed as well, at least for Rooney's character. She had a pretty good understanding of what was being asked of her and what she would need to do. And we did talk about not necessarily the backstory of her characters, but just the emotional mindset of her character. We talked a lot about grief and bereavement, and we read articles and books on the grieving process, just so we'd have a platform in which to base a performance.
Yeah.
With Casey, I just sent him a photograph of the costume and let him know that was what he was going to be wearing for the vast majority of the film. And that was pretty much it.
Okay, so I was wondering, in a lot of those scenes, I was thinking, is Casey actually always the one in that, under that sheet? Or did you use other people at different times?
Not always, but often enough that it's worth, giving him credit for putting that costume on.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Our art director, David Pink, wore the costume in those scenes where the Ghost and Casey are in the screen at the same time. Yeah. And then when we went back to do pickups and reshoots, David wore the costume because Casey was no longer available to come back to Texas. Yeah. But at the outset, the idea was that he would always be under the sheet for every single scene, and he was pretty committed to that idea.
Wow. Now that sheet itself, like just thinking about how you cover a full-size adult in that big of a costume, so it looks like a sheet hanging, like one sheet, that had to be a massive piece of material to be able to walk and kind of make the movements that thing made. Is that the case?
Yeah, it was 100% custom built costume. It was meant to look like a bed sheet, but it in no way is an actual bed sheet. Yeah. Because even a king size sheet will not cover a human being from head to toe, as we found out in our early tests.
Oh, is that right?
The costume involves not just the fabric that covers him, but an entire substructure that exists underneath that fabric to give his body the right shape and definition, and to allow the face to function in the proper way. Yeah. So there's a whole lot going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that
underneath what looks very simple.
Yeah, that whole look. I mean, the look of right. So that's obviously it's a ghost in the Ghost Story, but the way that costume looked, it really was a character. Like it was an important part of the whole film. The way that he stood and the way that the ghost sort of moved and looked. That was an important part of the visual experience.
Yeah, we definitely wanted the ghost to feel like a real ghost, in spite of the fact that it is meant to also look like a Halloween costume. We still wanted the audience to engage with this character as if it was an actual spirit or a phantom, and to do that required very specific movements, an understanding of how to film this character. How far to put the camera from him. There was a whole lot going on to pull that illusion off. So in spite of the fact that he's very tactile and physical and handmade, he still has this spiritual quality.
Yeah, for sure.
That goes beyond the physical. And accomplishing that was harder than I thought. But once we figured it out, we knew that the movie would work.
Okay, so I want to ask you one more thing about that costume. The eyes on the ghost had the most somehow you created a sense of sadness in those eyes. I feel like that this film is in part about the grieving experience of a ghost, which I want to ask you about in a minute.
Exactly.
But, which I thought was amazing that somehow with just the eyes, it looked like such sadness. I don't know, maybe it's the way they were kind of hollow, or you couldn't really see in there, and there was some depth to the darkness of the eyes and the shape of them. That was really. Did a lot go into that part of it? Thinking about what the eyes looked like.
Yeah, we basically just tried out a bunch of different sizes and various approaches before we settled on those specific eyes. I knew that they needed to have depth to them. I knew that the idea that we needed to be able to see through the sheet to an abyss on the other side. Yeah, right. And for it to feel as if there was nobody actually inside the sheet.
Oh man, that
was
too.
A given.
Yeah. Wow.
But then from beyond that, finding the right size and the right angle and the right space was just trial and error. There was one sheet where we just tried out all the different eye sizes, and we just kept cutting different eye holes into it and trying them out. And if they didn't work, we would just pull the sheet down and try another,
Wow.
another foot down on the fabric. We would just cut more eyes in, and we just kept doing that until we found the right dynamic. They had to be the right size, the right angle, the right, distance apart from one another. And they had to sit on the face in the right way so that the folds of the fabric would then complement the eyes.
Yeah, right.
And there was a helmet that actually went under the sheet to hold them in place.
Uh-huh.
Because if you just cut the holes in the fabric, there would be a tendency for the eyes to turn into slits. And the illusion would instantly vanish. You would lose that emotion. So we had to make sure the eyes would stay circular and maintain their shape. And so they're actually pinned to the face in a very specific way. And it was way more complicated than we expected and way more complicated than it looks, but the ultimate effect was incredibly profound. And once we found it, we knew we had it.
Yeah, boy, that must have been a great moment when you looked at it on, when you looked at, I don't know, however you do that, through the lens or through the, through the monitor and saw that.
You get the ghost in front of the camera and realize, hey, he's working finally.
Yeah. From the ghost behind the machine to the ghost in front of the camera. So one of the things I thought was was the scary part of the movie for me. I know it's not a scary movie, but the idea that after someone dies, they could still carry such grief that they couldn't get free from it. Like the idea that, because typically the way the storylines go is that death is kind of the ultimate end, right? And so when you die, then you're either oblivious to or free from all grief and pain. This was a terrifying movie with that notion that what if that's not the case? Like, what if you are stuck in grief? Well, at least that's how I was reading the film, that his character was stuck in this grief and needed to find a way out of it, even after death.
It is very existentially terrifying, and it's also something that I've come to realize is probably directly rooted to my very strict Catholic upbringing, because the concept of purgatory was so intrinsic to my idea of the afterlife as a child that I just always understood that to be a potential, that there may be, that I may die and go to some strange hinterland between heaven and hell and exist there for as long as I needed to exist before I could move on to the next place. That's such a traditional Catholic belief, and such a strongly rooted one, that I can only assume that's where this came from to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about that consciously when I was writing the film by any means, but as I've spoken about it and talked about the way in which religion and concept of the afterlife play into the film, that I realize that's a very prevalent concept within the movie itself. And it is frightening. The idea that you could be stuck there for centuries or eternity even is very, it's terrifying. And so in spite of the fact that the movie isn't a horror film per se, it does deal with some very existential fears, both on Earth and in the great beyond.
So I guess that makes me want to ask you that question that I know you won't answer, and that is, what did M write on that little piece of paper that when C read it, the ghost collapses? What was written on that piece of paper? Because that seems to be the key to getting out of that existential crisis.
I think there's nothing, you're correct in assuming that I won't tell you, but it's not because I don't want to, it's because I don't actually know.
Right.
I never looked at what Rooney actually wrote. So the secret lies with her, and she's not telling anybody.
Yeah. I mean,
the fact of the matter is that there's nothing on that paper that could be as meaningful to the audience as it is to that character on screen.
Yeah.
It is not the contents of that note that set him free, but just the act of finally finding out what it says. It could say nothing at all. It could say, it could have, one of the jokes we've thrown around is that the recipe for chocolate pie is on that note. The note has the recipe for chocolate pie on it. And maybe that's all it is. And he just has to know. Once he's able to understand what it says, he's able to move on. He's able to let go of the one last thing that was keeping him restrained, that was holding him back. So, and in spite of the fact that it is a burning mystery that everyone is going to want to know, I can promise you that not seeing it is far more satisfying than actually seeing it.
And it's not
And
necessarily...
I can say that without even knowing what it says.
That's right. If anyone knows that, you do. And it's not necessarily connected to that other ghost with that comment, they're not coming back. You weren't trying to make a correlation between those two?
Well, there is a little bit of a correlation in that she is waiting for someone to come. Like that's why she's still there.
Yeah.
That's why she can't leave, because she's waiting for someone to come. And the moment when she finally realizes and acknowledges that they aren't going to come, she's able to let go and move on herself.
Yeah.
So that is her version of letting go. Our hero ghost version is coming to terms with whatever that note says,
that is, sure. Yeah.
and just finally answering that question that's been burning inside of him for centuries at that point. And once he's able to, process that information, he's able to move on in the same way that the ghost next door is, or the same way that the ghost next door was able to.
So I thought the acting...
Also, Doug, it looks like we have time for one more question, Doug.
Great. Thanks a lot. So
Thank you.
I feel like the acting in this film was so incredible. Rooney's scene of eating that pie that was shot in such... I mean, first of all, so many of the scenes were shot so long. Some people I saw it with felt like it was really intrusive and uncomfortable. I thought it was fantastic. But her acting in that scene and the one when they're laying in bed, that was such amazing acting with no words. The film is so slight on words anyway. Do you have any thoughts about what she was able to do to make someone feel so connected to her laying in that bed and then so in her grief while she was eating that pie? And any thoughts on why you held those shots for so long?
Well, I held them long for different reasons, but the one thing that binds the two together is the idea of the passage of time being a central part of this narrative experience. I wanted the audience to be acutely aware of how time is flowing through this film. And sometimes it flows very, very slowly, and sometimes it flows very quickly. And that's the way time works for us in life. Like, time is such a relative experience. And I wanted that relativity to exist in this movie. So at the beginning of the movie, time is moving very, very slowly, and we just exist in these moments with these characters. In the moment in the bedroom with the two of them in bed, it's a very tender and sweet moment that really, on a physical level, lets us know how much these characters care for one another. Yeah. And it's great to just spend time with them in that moment, to be part of that moment with them, and to understand the connection on a very palpable level.
Yeah, those single shots
in the scene where Rooney comes home.
Yeah.
And because it's a single shot, you just get lost in that moment. You're not waiting for another shot to come afterwards. You're not waiting for the movie to cut to a new scene. You're just existing in that moment for a sustained period of time. For the scene where Rooney comes home after the funeral and eats her feelings, that moment is meant to be uncomfortable in the same way that the moment in the bedroom is meant to be tender. The longer it goes on, the more uncomfortable it gets. And we are just so aware that we are not supposed to be watching this moment. Right. It is a very private scene. It's a private, act that she is performing, and we should not be party to it. And yet we are. And so we are just forced to be in that moment and exist in that moment with her, and hopefully feel her grief. If we don't feel her grief, we at the very least feel the discomfort that she must be feeling, because it is a very uncomfortable moment for her, just as it is for us in the audience. The duration is key to that discomfort. It is meant to push you past the point you're waiting for it to cut, and it just never does. It just pushes you past the limit in a very physical fashion. In terms of her performance, all I can say is that she's a tremendous actress. She's an incredibly intuitive actress. She understands how to hold the camera for a scene that lasts that long. And that's a challenging thing. It's a very sustained note that she has to play. And it would be easy to just, let it break at a certain point, but she keeps it going. She keeps it building. She really lets it grow at a very subtle level and a very intense level. And I know that it was difficult for her. She's talked about that since, about how acting in front of a camera for that duration of time when you are technically doing so little is very challenging, and then left her feeling very exposed. But again, she's a professional actress. She's very good at her job, and she's committed to the roles that she engages with. So I had no doubt in my mind that she would be able to hold the camera for those incredibly sustained durations.
Did you tell her how long to hold it for, or did she sort of intuit that this would be the right time to get up and run to the bathroom?
No, I left it up to her.
Wow.
I left it up to her entirely. She could have brought that scene to a close much more quickly, or she could have kept it going for as long as she felt was appropriate. But I wanted to leave that ultimate duration up to her.
Well, hey, thanks so much for this conversation, and thanks for the film. It's really terrific. Best of luck to you with it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm excited for more people to see it. So thanks for getting the word out for me.
I'm glad to.
All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.
David, is that you?
No, it's still Doug. I'm going to hang up then. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your help putting this together.
Yeah, no problem at all. Have a great one, okay?
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, well, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Go see the film. I'm trying to help get the word out. And speaking of getting the word out, if you like this podcast, tell people about it. When they say, hey, what do you listen to? Say, on occasion, every once in a while, every now and again, I give a listen to this one. The TikTok Take with Doug Pagitt. By the way, a little title branding change might be coming to the podcast. Won't change anything for you. Stream will stay the same. Everything will stay as it is for your listening enjoyment. But the frame, the title, the branding, that might be changing. But stick with me and stay tuned for all that. And hey, enjoy your day. Thanks.